Hello, fellow stampers. This is Yana Smakula for SimonSaysStamp.com. Welcome back for another Yippee for Yana video. For today's episode, I decided to go back to two of my favorite techniques. First, coloring with Copic markers on colored cardstock. I'm using very pretty light pink cardstock from Hero Arts. This is color Peony. And a second technique is combining Copic coloring with heat embossing. I know I share Copics and heat embossing very often, and a lot of you are concerned about coloring with Copic markers over heat embossed images. So I decided to share a refresher on a workaround for this trick or this technique. I've already mounted my clear stamp on the door of my new Misti. I just love this new updated design of this tool. This is Hero Arts Misti in black. I also have a Misti corner there in the right hand side bottom corner. It is acting as a spacer for my panel as the stamp that I'm using today is very big and it goes outside the edges of my panel. The stamp set I'm using is called Botanical Heart, and it is an utterly gorgeous floral stamp set with a beautiful oversized floral heart. You can see how big that heart image is. What I've already done is I have inked up my stamp with Copic marker friendly ink. I used Memento and stamped the image onto my paper. I did use my Misti stamping tool as this is crucial for making this technique work. You need to use some sort of stamp positioner tool to be able to do this technique. Now, I didn't care how perfect or imperfect my stamping was. I just needed to stamp the image onto the paper well enough to be able to color over it. The whole idea is to first stamp the image in Copic marker friendly ink, then color the image using Copic markers. Next, replace the image in the stamping tool and heat emboss the image over the previously stamped and colored one. This way, you will end up having a gorgeous heat embossed image that was colored with Copic markers, and you would not have used your markers over heat embossing. Instead, you would have used them under heat embossing. I personally don't mind coloring over heat embossing, but the embossing powder can get on the tip of your marker and it can damage it. And I have had that happen just because I'm rather reckless when it comes to my markers. It doesn't really bother me, but if you'd rather be on the safe side, and especially if you have a stamp positioner, I feel like everyone now has at least one stamp positioner tool in their stash, you can definitely do this technique. With my stamping done, I started coloring the image. I love the look of deep, dark blue on pink, and this is the color combination I went with for this card. I used B21, B34, and B39 markers. You can tell that I'm not being very careful when coloring. Because we will heat emboss this image outline over our coloring, the coloring doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, I'm going for rather speedy coloring here. I'm first applying my lightest color, B21, to saturate the paper. Next, I'm adding medium color, B34, and also adding darkest color, B39. Because my paper is well saturated, those colors bleed and blend easily. And all I have to do is just go back with the lightest color. Now my B21 marker, the lightest, is well inked. It's nice and juicy, and so it saturates the paper really well. It took me about 20 minutes to color this heart, but like I said, I wasn't being too careful or too precise when doing my coloring. The embossing really covers up a lot of the coloring, so there's no sense stressing over tiny details or any imperfections. Just do simple coloring, and most importantly, do enjoy the process. Now I'm coloring on light pink cardstock. I like to color with Copic markers on not just white paper. But because of the nature of these markers, you won't be able to color with them on dark papers. I often like to color on light gray, light pink, light blue. So anything colored but light, that would still work, although the color of the paper will still alter some of the Copic marker colors that you're using. So this is just something to keep in mind. I did leave my panel to dry for about 30 minutes. I went and took a shower, and then I just let it sit in the meantime. By the time I was back, the ink was already dry and I was able to heat emboss the image. Now, I did test the background first by pouring embossing powder over it. None stuck to the paper where my coloring was, so that indicated that my panel was dry and I could proceed to heat emboss it. I placed the panel back into my Misti. Because I had the Misti corner in there, it allowed me to place my panel exactly as it was before, perfectly spaced away from the edge of the tool. I treated the paper with anti-static powder. I like to tap on the powder tool and then use a dry paintbrush to distribute the powder on the paper, especially if I'm trying to cover a large area. Next, I closed the door of my Misti to double check if the images lined up. They did line up, and so I went ahead and inked up the image with clear embossing ink and stamped it onto my panel. This is perhaps the scariest moment, as it is very easy to mess things up if you don't place the panel exactly as it was before. You can shift the panel slightly and the embossing is going to be off, so better double check before stamping. Next, I added antique gold embossing powder. I did get some stray embossing powder particles onto the panel where there wasn't any stamping, so I cleaned that up using the same dry paint brush. Next, I used my heat tool and heat set the powder in place to melt it. Everything lined up perfectly and I ended up with a stunning heat embossed and colored image. I stamped a sentiment that reads just a note to say hello. I also stamped a decorative circle and cut it out using a coordinating die. The sentiment comes from the same botanical heart stamp set as the heart itself. I've foam mounted the panel onto an A2 white side folding card base, and I foam mounted the sentiment circle over it. I also used sequins from the GALA set from Simon and gold jewels from Pretty Pink Posh to embellish this card. Now, I've actually made 2 cards. The first one I made, I colored the images after I did my heat embossing, and I was having a very hard time getting good color results. You can see the 2 cards side by side here. Now, this is one of my favorite techniques. Well, actually 2 of my favorite techniques when it comes to Copic markers. I hope you'll give this idea a try if you haven't already. If you make a card inspired by this video, we'd love it if you shared your project online and tagged us on social media. We always love seeing what you guys are making. Be sure to give this video a thumbs up and to subscribe to this channel if you haven't yet done so. Thanks so much for joining me today. Love you guys, and I'll see you next time.